Hey everyone, you're listening to the Simple Electronics Podcast. I'm your host, Dan from the Simple Electronics YouTube channel. This episode is brought to you by PCBWay, but more about that later because right now I've got a very special guest, Roland from Roll2Videos. How are you, Roland?
I'm doing great. And how about yourself?
I'm doing great. Unlike a lot of my sort of my regular guests, I typically get a lot of time to take a look at their YouTube channels, and then I send them a podcast request, and then we get together and we record a podcast. With you, it's very different because the YouTube algorithm basically served me your videos yesterday. I watched a couple of them and then I asked you to come onto the podcast, and you agreed, which is pretty awesome. And since then, I've probably watched about 4 or 5 more videos. So usually, I ask the guests to introduce themselves to the audience. But could you introduce yourself to me and the audience? Tell us who you are, what you do, what's your channel about?
Sure. And thank you very much for watching my videos. And I'm happy to hear that the algorithm is putting me out there. Um, I'm Roland. I'm a construction worker by trade. And I've been interested in solar and off grid stuff and batteries for quite a long time. Ever since I was young, I've always been the one to help people hook up their stereo systems in the car. I'm not sure. I know you got a mechanic background, but I'm not sure if you remember like the early 2000 cars used to always have really horrible stereo systems in them.
Yep.
Um, so I'd always be the one to help hook up stereos and things of that nature. So I've always been kind of handy in that way. And it just kind of spilled over into off grid and solar because that's kind of where I got interested in. So I've been building that for a while, and I've always kind of got my information on YouTube and watched other people do builds and hookups and things of that nature. So I kind of thought, well, I'm going to try it out and see how it works. And everything started to work, and I figured I'd just share my experiences, try and help other people build their systems.
Yeah, and that indeed, because your video, your channel is kind of full of it's not so much the look what I've done kind of channel. It's more of a look what this product is and is this right for you type channel. So I really appreciate someone who can churn through a whole bunch of different things and mix in projects and stuff like that with it. So I think your channel is perfect for anybody who is wanting to dip their toes into solar and off grid stuff, which is a really big interest of mine. I just don't have really the funding to go through with, with starting up in that kind of stuff. Um,
Yeah.
what's the end game for you? Like, what? I see you have a bunch of products and stuff on your channel, but what are you actually trying to do with it? Are you trying to live off grid? Do you have like a solar shed? Are you just interested? What's the end game?
Well, currently, right now, I'm in a subdivision. So there's not really very much room to expand and do a full array. Thankfully, my parents live outside of town. So not only do I get to go over and hang out with them and see them, but they've also allowed me to build some things on their property just to play around with. The goal is I do want to move out to a more rural area. Unfortunately, though, with everything we've kind of gone through in the last few years, house prices are insane right now, and there's not really anything appealing right now on the market. But we are looking to move out to a more rural area, and I want to do like a full, not, I don't think I would ever be able to achieve being 100% off grid. I'm always going to have to rely on it, but just to have some sort of backup and some sort of way out, I guess you can say, if needed be. Well, if need be. Um, my ultimate goal would be to have a house with a separate garage and run the garage completely off grid with arrays, mini splits, inverter units, and then have the ability to actually backfeed into the house, not past the meter, but just to supplement the power inside the home. When the batteries are full and the solar is still producing, there could be a lot of waste after that. So I'd like to try and utilize that. And then have it set up. A lot of rural homes have like Generac units hooked up to their home And if they happen to lose power, which kind of happens frequently once you get further out of the cities, is that instead of having a Generac generator fire up to supply power to some of the critical loads, I would have my batteries and my solar ramp up and backfeed critical loads like furnaces or fridges and freezers and things of that nature. And then, depending how far I want it to go, I can even go further and then even put a Generac generator behind the solar unit so that if there's no solar or battery, then the Generac can fire up as kind of like an ultimate backup. But I always come up with ideas and navigate through things and try and figure out, okay, well, I can do this, and then I can even add this and add that and add that. And I'm always adding things on that, probably might be unnecessary in the long run, but I just think it's cool to attempt it.
It's the cool factor that drives us. So I don't blame you for that at all. And I totally understand what you mean about sort of subdivision life. I'm not necessarily in a subdivision, but I'm in a townhome. So my backyard is kind of long, but very, very narrow. And so, yeah, I've got no space for solar panels. I'm just going to start dipping my feet into solar this year. Last year I bought two 100-watt solar panels, and I also had another 100-watt solar panel sent to me as a review unit. And so I have 300 watts of solar I'm going to set up in my backyard. But then
Very
the
nice.
problem is the house shades the backyard.
Mm,
And so in order for it to be out of the shade, I have to go roughly 75 feet back behind the house. And that means that I'm going to have to run 75 feet of cable, which means, two back and forth, that's 150 feet. And so I'm going to lose a lot of my power just running the cables.
yes.
But yeah, I completely, I'm dipping my toes because obviously my property isn't really well set up for it.
Right.
However, let me share with you what my dream is. It's not going to happen this year, but by this time next year, I should be ready to go. So my plan is to have those 300, maybe go up and double. I could probably support double the size, let's say 600 watts of solar panel in the backyard. And I want to have a bank of lithium iron phosphor batteries
Mm-hmm.
in the house and then charge them. And then on the weekends, disconnect those batteries, take them with me to my parents have a cottage out on the Quebec side and power a solar raft basically for the
Oh,
whole weekend of use, and then disconnect the batteries, bring them back home, charge them up during the week. That is the short term goal, and the long term goal will be to take that solar raft. And since you're a fellow Ontarian, you may know exactly what this is, but I want to take it down the Rideau Canalway
mm-hmm.
from
Yep.
Ottawa here all the way down. Apparently, you can get all the way down to Lake Ontario. So that would be awesome, like a 3-week trip or something on a solar raft. So that's my long term goal. Do you think that's feasible?
I do. Are you going to be intermittently, like, you're obviously going to be camping along the way along the river? Because you
I'm going
said
to be,
it's about a 3 week.
yeah, I'm going to be camping in the boat. So the boat is going to be
Oh,
roughly, let's say, about, maybe 15, 16 feet long by about 8 feet wide. So it's going to be like a raft,
okay.
displacement hull, very slow moving thing with a solar roof on it. So that's the eventual goal.
That's what I was going to suggest, was some sort of kind of like a bimini top with solar panels so that you can recharge the batteries and also keep yourself out of the sun.
Yep, that would be the
So,
plan. And then fishing all the way up and all the way down, basically.
and you're going to film it all, obviously, and put it up for us all to see.
Of course.
Nice. Yeah,
So
no, that sounds amazing.
because I see you, so I'm just looking at your channel, and you have a couple of, actually, it looks like you've received pretty much, or you've bought or whatever, all the stuff that I would need for this, because you've got hundreds of amp hours worth of batteries. You've got a decent solar system. What are you doing with all this stuff now? Do you keep the stuff that you review, or do you send it back? What's the deal with that?
So some of the products I get, I do send back to the companies. Some of them I do get to keep, and I just want to put them all together. A lot of the products I can use, I can actually open up and harvest the cells, or I can use them for various other little projects. So basically, I send some of them back. Some of them I do get to keep. And I would say out of the stuff on my channel, maybe 70% of the stuff has been sent to me, and about 30% has been out of pocket.
Okay. Uh, I've seen you tear open a lot of the batteries you get. So the
Yeah.
most recent one I watched has the most fantastic thumbnail on your whole channel. Is the one where you're holding the DeWalt
Oh,
chainsaw above the battery. You guys, I won't even spoil how he opens it, but go take a look at that video. I'll link it in the description. Um, when you open these batteries, a lot of the cells are laser welded. I guess do you have? Is that the kind of cell that you're salvaging, or are those the kinds you kind of want to put back together and use as is?
in that specific battery you're talking about, I actually did notice the terminal or the bus bars are laser welded, but I did notice that there's holes in the bus bars and I can see threading down through. So I'm debating on venturing into actually trying to expose those threads in underneath the laser welded bus bar because it's could be catastrophic for the cell. I'm not too worried about any kind of explosion or anything with lithium iron phosphate, just due to the chemistry stable, how stable it is. But I am thinking about venturing in and actually trying to drill out a bigger hole to get to the threading so I can reuse those cells. And then what I'd be able to do is make like a 48-volt pack out of the cells. I would just need another 8 more cells to add to it. But some of them, if they're laser welded, it's I don't show it in the video, but it's kind of like my heart drops out because it's like, oh, I can't really do anything with this. Or if I get pouch cells instead of the prismatic cells, again, it kind of, for me personally, it kind of sucks. There's nothing wrong with the cells. There's nothing wrong with the pack typically, but as far as me being able to harvest them to use them for something else, it becomes a little bit more challenging at that point.
Fair enough. So how about this? You've looked at quite a few things on your channel. Let's say there's a viewer out there that's interested in starting with, at home solar power. Maybe they don't want to, power a fridge for a week during a power outage, but let's say they just want to offset their electricity bill by using some free to me energy type stuff. Do you have any recommendations for someone who has, I don't know, 500-600 bucks, something like that? Let's say 700 bucks Canadian. That's about 500 bucks American. Do you have any recommendations around that price point just to get someone's foot in the door?
I think as far as offsetting anything into your home, like I won't. Um, hmm. As far as offsetting power in your home, if you just want to charge something and bring it in and plug into the device, the solar generators on the market are pretty good. There's a couple of the big companies out there, like EcoFlow or Blue Yeti. They're really great. If you are going to buy a smaller solar generator, look at the chemistry of the battery. If it's lithium iron phosphate, it's going to give you like 3,000 to 4,000 charge cycles, which is depleting the battery and charging it back up again. That's going to last you a really long time. You could probably charge it and deplete it once a day for like 14 years. And depending on how fast you're depleting it and how fast you're charging it, it's going to affect it. So the lower rates of discharge or charge that you can do, which is why having a bigger battery bank is usually typically better because it'll last a lot longer. Stay away from nickel, magnesium, cobalt batteries. They're kind of like the 18650 style cells. That's the same battery chemistry that's in your laptop. It's the same one that's in your cell phone. Um, they are a little bit more volatile of a chemistry. Uh, if you do puncture the cells or break them or mishandle them, you could have a fire on your hands. Um, and they don't last typically very long. You're looking maybe 600 to 800 charge cycles. So very low longevity in those chemistries. If um, if you're ever looking to do any type of solar, don't put anything on your home unless you're a licensed installer and you have the certifications to do so and the knowledge. Don't put anything on your home. I believe in the code book, it's any building or structure, which covers any kind of shed or anything like that. And basically, why I say that is just a lot of information out there is kind of bad. The reason why you don't put it on your home is because there's certain safeguards that need to be in place. And the one biggest one I can think of off the top of my head is one unit you need on your solar array is a rapid dissipation device, I believe it's called. And there needs to be a shutdown in a certain location so that if your house, God forbid, ever catches on fire and a firefighter comes, if they can't find that shutdown, they will not spray water on your home because it's a hazard to them. What that does is it cuts the power supply from the solar panel and dissipates all the excess electricity, which then they can actually go in and do their job. If we're just DIYing stuff onto our homes, it's very dangerous and could harm somebody. So I always try and do ground mount systems. I never put anything on my home. And also, you could run into liability with insurance. So if something happens in your home, let's say your basement floods out, I mean, the insurance company could literally come see the water damage, look at your solar array and go, oh, your solar array's not hooked up appropriately. We're voiding your insurance. So I would definitely try and stay away from installing anything directly onto your home.
Well,
Um,
that's really good advice already. So
yeah,
stuff like you're like I was saying about $700, but I can see on Amazon there's like a EcoFlow Delta Mini, so 882 watt hours with 1400 watts worth of AC outlets for $1,000. Is that the kind of thing that you're recommending for like someone who's just getting started?
how many watts was the inverter on that?
It says, well, it says it has 5 times 1400 watt AC outlets, but that's probably 5 outlets, but 1400 watts total, I'm assuming.
So that's not bad. 882 watt hours. Um, it's not much.
No.
One of my 12-volt 100 amp hour batteries is like over 12. I think it's 1260 watt hours. So it's not much. You won't be able to have a long run time depending on your load. If you're running at 1400 watts, that's not going to last very long at all, less than an hour. But if you're looking for something for a power outage, or something if you just want to bring in and charge your phone at night, the cost of power coming from the utility company, I mean, you're talking about offsetting, a couple dollars, if that, a month. So it's almost not worth it to do a small setup like that. You're gonna exhaust more time just trying to get everything to run and set everything up when you can just have the power come from the utility company.
So then what
So
would
it's
you say is like the sweet spot, the sweet, cost of a solar, or maybe the specs of a solar system that you would recommend as sort of like as a minimum?
for offsetting cost from the utility company. It's going to cost quite a bit. Um, Thankfully, solar panels themselves have come down in cost quite a bit. I mean, when I started into this, maybe 5 to 10 years ago in that range, solar panels were, probably 4 or 5 times the price what they are now. Lithium is starting to come down as well. So the cost of batteries themselves are coming down. So to off put electricity, it's a difficult question. I mean, even mostly out there when you see solar panels on residential homes, there's no batteries typically with those systems. It's power coming right in from the solar panel into an inverter and fed directly into the grid. And then if the power goes out, then that inverter system shuts down. So if the power's out, your panels aren't even producing anything.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
to DIY a system, I wouldn't recommend it for a DIYer. Like even there's times when I'm doing something and I stop and think to myself like, yeah, maybe this is a little bit out of my comfort zone. For a DIYer, it's very difficult to do anything with in-home stuff. I would just honestly recommend getting a professional installer to look at that and maybe go over it with you as far as home stuff. But I mean, if you have a cabin or a cottage or, a small garage where you don't have AC wiring to it and you just want to run something small for yourself, what I do can help you out. But as far as like a large scale running a home or backup for a home, it's very difficult and very costly currently.
So you're saying unless you're going into a serious system with a professional installer and have sort of like the 20 grand or more that it's going to cost you to put on your roof, solar sort of harvesting is more for fun than for practical purposes. Then does that make sense?
Yeah, for me it is. Yeah, when you're getting into big stuff like that, like especially even I'm getting into the 48 volt category of batteries, which then I need to up the voltage of my solar array in order to achieve it. And I mean, you're talking anything over 50 volts can actually kill you. And there's certain guidelines you need to follow in order to keep yourself safe, which takes a lot of kind of training and reading and learning about this stuff. And there's still even things today that I'm learning. Once you start getting into those higher voltages, it's very dangerous because you could seriously harm yourself. Even the batteries I'm working with, when they get fully charged, they're at 58.2 volts at a full state of charge. So that puts me over that kind of 50 volt uh, threshold of harm. And then when I'm working with the solar arrays, I mean, there's some all in one solar generators on the market that you can hook up like 500 volts DC to them from your array. So, I mean, 500 volts DC is really dangerous to handle. So, you definitely got to make sure that you take your time. I wouldn't recommend it for a DIYer. Even on my channel, when I'm hooking anything up on AC side, I always try and mention, like, I'm not an electrician. Don't follow what I'm doing. But I know people are going to do it anyways. But I just try and put a high emphasis on, like, do your own research and make sure you're taking your time and researching. And I hope nobody out there gets harmed off of watching what I'm doing. I think it's great knowledge for people to have if they need to use it. I just it can be extremely dangerous.
Oh, for sure.
I'll just say that.
Just a quick interruption to talk about this episode's sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay has been a long-term sponsor of the channel, and I think they're a good match for my channel because they provide quality PCBs for a reasonable price. You can get boards manufactured up to 100 mils by 100 mils for just $5, including shipping to Canada, $15 US, including shipping to USA, $12 US, which is incredibly cheap for professionally manufactured PCBs. I can personally attest to the quality of these PCBs, and so if you want a circuit immortalized forever, check out PCBWay.com with the link in the description. Now back to the conversation. But you got to look at it this way. If people go and watch your videos, they're inspired by what you do, and then they do something and they get hurt, okay? I mean, it could happen. The stuff that I mess with sometimes can be dangerous too. But if your videos weren't there, you have to assume that the person would get less knowledge on the subject and then hurt themselves worse, or they have a bigger chance of hurting themselves. So when they see someone on YouTube working with, dangerous, quote unquote, because anything's dangerous really, but dangerous stuff, you have to also assume that they're already interested and they would mess with it without with or without seeing your video. So the way to think about it is that if anything, your videos are adding to the knowledge base, and therefore people are safer by consequence.
Yeah,
And
that's a great way to look at it.
yeah, and if they can watch you do something without getting hurt, and they try to emulate you and they don't, and they do get hurt, then without you they would have got hurt anyway. You know what I
Yeah, the
mean?
probability is higher.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I do want to take a moment though, because I am a certified auto mechanic. I've been doing this for about almost 18 years now. And I do want to take a moment to just reiterate what you said. Um, we set the threshold in the automotive field to about 60 volts, being the lethal voltage DC. And in cars, just for people listening, any system that's above that's like 60 volts and above has to have a blue sheath on the wires, so that anybody working on it knows that the blue sheath represents a deadly voltage. Above that, about at 100, I think it's 110 volts DC. We're talking about hybrid cars. So the 60 volts plus is micro hybrids mostly, but hybrid cars are like 110 plus. Most hybrid cars are up near 600 volts now, same thing as electric cars. They have to have an orange sheath on the wires. And what Roland is talking about is serious. The voltage and the current um, available from even my 100-watt panel when I was messing with it in the sun is no joke. 100 watts is a lot of current, a lot of power. But what saves you is that the voltage isn't high enough to be transferred easily through your body. But at 60 volts or 50 volts, the what happens is the portion of your skin that's not particularly conductive, it pierces that and then goes into the conductive, basically salt water that we're made of, and that's why it can kill you. So Roland is not kidding. If you're going to mess with voltages above around 50, 60, you need to protect yourself. Wear rubber gloves. Work one-handed. There's a few tricks. You probably shouldn't get that information off this podcast, but I just wanted to reiterate what you
No.
said, just because it is true. I want to corroborate what you say. It is very true. And I spend 4 hours with my students every semester going over high voltage safety. So it is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, and I picked up on something you said, the working one-handed, and I could agree with that too. Because if you're touching one electrode with one hand and one with the other, that's going to pass directly through your heart as it goes through your arms. I did have it's not really an incident, but I did have where I was working with one of my higher voltage batteries. We call them 48 volt nominal, but they're actually 51.4 to 51.4 volts is their nominal voltage. So I was working with it and I was trying to tighten something up, and I happened to lean over, and my arm had contacted two of the terminals. I don't believe it contacted it after it was series to 48 volts. I think it was more around the 24 volts, but I felt that little tingle in my arm, and I was like, okay, I need to back up and give this a little bit more respect, and
Yep.
kind of backed away from what I was doing.
But that's exactly it. And even 12 volt systems, your car battery, it can provide roughly 600 amps at 12 volts. And so the only thing that saves us is that we're not conductive enough. Our skin is like resistive enough. But if you're, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but the positive terminal is the captain of the ship, is the first one on, it's the last one off. And so in a car, people have a tendency to start with the positive, because it's the red, it's the first one we think of, but your
Mm.
whole car is negative. And
Mm-hmm.
so if your wrench goes from the positive post and touches the car, you're short circuiting, over 600 amps. That wrench will stick to your skin. It'll get so hot that quick.
Mm-hmm.
So, so if people can just picture that, but now with enough voltage to pierce the resistive elements of our skin, this is what's deadly. That's the problem. So
Yeah,
I'm glad you are mentioning that, because high voltage is dangerous. High voltage DC, especially, is fierce.
very much so.
Oh, and I'm also a big proponent of cheap multimeters when when you're starting in the hobby, either electronics or automotive, because most of the things you do in electronics is sort of like at or below 5 volts, and most of the stuff you do in electronics is at or below 5 volts. In automotive, it's at or below 14 volts. When you're working on a higher voltage circuit, you must use a multimeter rated Cat 3 or Cat 4. You must. And your multimeter has to be of good enough brand that you can trust that it actually been tested on Cat 3 and Cat 4. What I tell my students is, if you want to trust your life on one thing, probably should buy a Fluke. It's some of the best multimeters made in the industry. They're lifetime warranty, and you can trust that they're rated. What kind of multimeter are you using for your higher voltage stuff, if you don't mind me asking?
For the higher voltage stuff, I'm actually looking at one of your videos from 5 years ago that I actually have three different multimeters. Um, I have the, what is it, the UNI-T UT210E.
Yep, I love
I
that
have
one.
that. That's kind of my main go-to, especially for the clamp meter. I find it to be the most accurate. I do have like just a quick, if I just want to know the voltage real quick of something, I just have a little cheap Mastercraft that's always close by. That if I just need to have a quick voltage reading, I can use that. And then I have a third one that I'd actually bought from Home Depot. It was quite expensive, but I don't find it very accurate, and I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head.
Home Depot, it
But I,
might be an X Tech.
um, I'll have to look it up. But yeah, I can't think of the name right now because I hardly use it because I found it to be pretty inaccurate on the clamp meter. Maybe it's better for the AC side of things, but as far as DC, I don't find it to be very accurate.
Oh, it might be a Klein.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah. So the Klein clamp meters are meant for electricians. So very likely most of the R&D went on the AC side.
Yeah, yeah, and even on the AC side of things, like I'm always constantly testing things, even if I'm wiring something up AC. Even if like in my home, even if I was to disconnect at the panel, flick the breaker, and even disconnect the wires from the breaker panel, when I get back to like if I'm changing out a light or receptacle, I'm still testing it with my just one of those little handheld. You push the button and it beeps if it's live. Like
Yeah,
even if
that
I'm
the
holding the end of the wire in my hand, I'll still test it with my other hand. Like just it's just become habit, and I think it's a great habit to have.
Oh, for sure. I see on your channel you built a sort of DIY power wall, and I'm just looking at the thumbnails. It kind of looks like you're using used, 18650 cells. Is that what's going
Yep.
on there?
Yes, it is. That was one of my earlier. That was before I had actually gotten into lithium iron phosphate. Because they're cheap cells, and the way I'd actually acquired them was I started ripping apart old electronics, like any old drill batteries that I had lying around, and took the cells out of that, and then didn't have enough to really do anything with anything sizable like the little power wall I had. So I ended up just calling around to some random laptop repair like ads on Facebook and on Marketplace, and just sent them out a message like, "Hey, I looking for old used laptop batteries. Do you have any lying around?" And one guy replied back and said, "Yeah, you'll save me a trip to the recycling facility. Come get them." So went, and he had about 3 boxes of batteries for me. So
Oh,
I
wow.
got the batteries and then I tested each individual one. It's pretty simple. You can buy, I think Lido Kayla sells like a 4 battery tester. You put them in, you put it on test mode, it'll charge it up, and then it'll discharge them and calculate the amount of watt hours. Well, actually, it'd be milliwatt hours for something of that size. And then give me a reading at the end. Another way to test them too is charge them back up and then leave them on a shelf somewhere for about 2 weeks, and then come back and test them with a multimeter. Any batteries that have dropped in voltage, there's something going on internally, so they're no good. And then also heat while charging them. So when you charge them up, if they start to give off an excess amount of heat, then again, there's some sort of short inside the cell itself. If anybody is looking to go through that process, they need to be extremely careful with those batteries because there is cobalt in them, and cobalt is unstable if it's handled inappropriately. So it could cause a fire or have a little bit of an explosion. So you definitely need to be careful while handling those cells. I would not recommend it uh, anymore. I don't even work with those cells anymore. I think I have that power wall sitting in the background in some of my videos, and that's about it. But if you do decide to go that route, just be very careful with them. They can bite you in the butt. Definitely keep an eye out on where the positive, and because it has a sheath over top of it, but the whole entire cell itself is the negative, and then the positive terminal, there's like a millimeter of gap between the positive and negative, so it's very easy to contact both of them at the same time and have a thermal runaway. And again, if you do work with them and you find any bad cells, do not just throw them in the garbage. Find a recycler that will take them and take them to an actual place that recycles batteries, because it's very, very bad to the environment if they're just thrown into landfills.
Yeah, I think cobalt itself is mildly radioactive, but I think the big issue with 18650 lithium cells is exactly what you said, the thermal runaway. So I think the principle behind it is that when the cells get warm, they release gases, and those
Mm-hmm.
gases have a reaction which release heat, which then makes the cell release more gases, and so on and so on. It's self-perpetuating until it either overpressurizes and blows, or it catches on fire. And so that's
Right.
that's the problem. You can't stop it. It's a runaway. It's the same reason why you can't mix too much epoxy in the same batch, because epoxy gets hot, which makes it accelerate the reaction, which makes it gets hotter, and so on, but just explosively. So I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, like, the reason why they're used so much in cell phones and laptops and electric vehicles is because of the weight to power ratio. So you get a lot of bang for your buck. Like, you get a lot of energy storage in those cells comparative to the weight. So like lithium iron phosphate has a higher weight to energy density. So it's why they're not really used in a lot of electric cars. Um, but the chemistry is changing, and the science and development into these different chemistries is advancing. So high hopes for the future on that. Hopefully, they can switch to lithium iron phosphate chemistry for electric vehicles and more devices, because they will last longer just by the characteristics of the battery itself. Um, yeah, so hopefully, more research goes into these different batteries and chemistries in order to advance us a little bit closer to the goal of being cleaner, I guess you could say.
Are you optimistic or pessimistic about electric cars in the near future? And I just want to preface this by saying you're a fellow Ontarian. And so, like I know, that the cold wreaks havoc on certain battery chemistries. But what's your opinion on I think it was 2035, they want to phase out the selling of gasoline engine cars in Canada. Do you think that's possible?
I don't, because I don't see the development of mining happening to get these critical metals and all the stuff they need to put into these batteries. I don't see that accelerating at a fast enough pace. I do see the nuclear energy side of things ramping up, which is great. I think that's the best way to get the energy right now that we have is through nuclear power and actually work in a nuclear power plant. Um, and that is advancing, which is amazing. As far as battery technology for the cold, there was a lot of development going into solid state batteries, which has more of a characteristic of being able to charge and discharge in colder climates. I believe it was up to negative 40 degrees. It would be perfectly fine without having to introduce any kind of heating. Because what happens in Canada or in any cold climate is the battery chemistry that is being used currently, you cannot charge them below freezing. So it'd be 0 degrees Celsius in Canada. And you can't discharge them below minus 20 degrees. So what they have to do to circumvent it is to put heaters in to heat the batteries. They actually, I believe it's, you'd probably know better than me, but I believe they use liquid cooling to keep the batteries at a good temperature for charging and discharging.
They do.
Yeah. So what I believe happens now, I don't have any background in it, but just from knowing the battery side of things, I believe what happens is they keep them at a temperature. You're out driving around, it's freezing cold out, and then when you get home and plug in, probably a lot of the initial time of plugging in is just bringing the batteries up to temperature in order to safely charge them without destroying them. I don't have any research or I haven't looked into it, but that's just off the top of my head what I believe happens. I think there's a lot of energy loss in that, just trying to keep the batteries themselves stable. So if they can develop and come out with some sort of different chemistry and technology, like the promise of solid state batteries that haven't come to fruition yet, unfortunately. But if they do come up with a new chemistry like solid state batteries, I do believe it could be achievable even in a colder climate like the one that we are in. I think it can be done. Um, as far as because as far as trucks and stuff like that and heavy haulers, I don't know if they'll ever be able to get away from gasoline for that, because they definitely need the power. They need a high amp if they're going electric. So unless they come out with a new chemistry for that, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of an opposite, and this is what's great about this, right? It's because it's first of all, it's all opinion at this point, right? Because
Yep.
at the moment, there are electric cars that work and work well, but you are correct. It does take quite a bit of energy to warm up those batteries and keep them warm. Thankfully, though, just the draw of the electric motor, though, discharging the cells, they'll actually warm themselves by discharge. So initially, it takes a bit to warm them up, but then as you drive around, just the charging and discharging, recuperating the energy through, geez, what's that called? Kinetic braking.
Regenerative braking.
Yeah, regenerative braking, and even just womping on the batteries. It'll keep them warm, and in fact, it gets to a point where they get so warm that, especially in electric cars, that they have to dump the heat somewhere. And typically in winter, they'll dump it into the cabin to keep you warm at the same time. Um, Now, it's more of a problem in summer, because in summer, those batteries get piping hot. And some electric cars have even gone to running AC refrigerant through the cell packs to try to keep them cold. So that's a big waste of energy as well, because or else there's the maximum you can dissipate because the deltas. I
Mm-hmm.
honestly think that the future, at least in Canada, of the big logistics, okay, like stuff comes into these. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but in Toronto, there's these massive container ships on Lake Ontario, right? That come out and unload all their stuff, and then in Vancouver and Montreal and Nova Scotia, it's kind of the same thing. Um, my opinion is that most of those goods need to move by rail. And when you get to the scale that a train is at that point, electric just makes sense, because where you can run a train track, you can run, a 1,000 volt line above the rail. And then for the last mile stuff, like say the rail line here, well, we've got rail going from Nova Scotia to Vancouver. For everything locally, electric does make sense, because we have full electric buses and stuff that work just fine. And so I guess my opinion is that without legislation like the ones that we're hearing in California, in Canada, in Europe, um, the auto manufacturers would just sit on their hands and do nothing. But now that there is that pressure, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the last 3-4 years, there's been an explosion of electric cars coming onto the market, because the manufacturers kept saying, "Oh, it's not possible. Nobody wants them. It's not possible. Nobody wants them." And then as soon as this legislation shows up, it's like, "Oh, here's an electric car." And you can't tell me that it took 4 months to develop a brand new electric car. They've been working on it for a while. They just have been trying to stall the legislation. And
Yeah.
so, in my opinion, I don't think that electric cars are good for everybody today, 2023. But by 2035, because we've twisted their hands, I think it'll be mainstream. It'll be ready to go by then. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. It is kind of out of reach for a lot of people currently, which is why I think if the market keeps going the way it's going, there's going to be demand for it. As far as legislation, I don't feel that that is necessary, or I don't think it should happen, because you can't legislate your way into fixing things. I think that the market will prevail, and if people want these cars, they will get them. Once technology advances and prices do come down, then I think that more people will afford them and more people will accept them and want them. Like, I personally don't drive an electric car. I wish I did, just because this is kind of what I'm into and this is what I love. But yeah, it's just too expensive right now. I really hope that that prices come down with advancements in technology and resources and getting the metals and and getting the battery technology that doesn't need as much to heat or cool and run more smoothly.
Yep, I agree. Um, it's that's just all a difference of opinion, but a good thing for people to watch. And maybe I don't know if you've seen it before, but there's a documentary, an old one, called "Who Killed the Electric Car."
I've
Have you
seen
heard of
it.
that? And
Yeah, and that's very very dirty what they did back then.
that's why I feel like we need to twist their arms a little bit, because even though these people, the gist of the story for those listening at home is that the GM had an EV1 in the 1990s, late 90s, early 2000s,
Yeah, around
and
there.
full electric car. Everybody who got one as a test unit, they leased it, loved it. They wanted to buy it out at the end
I
of
think
the
even Jay Leno had one.
yep, yep.
Yeah,
And they every I think it was nearly everybody wanted to buy it out at the end of their lease, and GM saw that they're too reliable. They don't need any servicing, barely any servicing, and they're not they don't consume any fuel, and so they decided to scrap them, take them
yeah.
back. No one
Well,
was allowed to buy them, and they scrapped them.
you, yeah, you can definitely. There's definitely a huge conversation that can be had on oil companies too being involved with that decision.
Hundred
And I
percent.
mean, like, if we're talking about the auto industry, I mean, you can even go back to when they used to run cars on ethanol. I believe the first car invented actually was a battery powered car.
It was.
Yeah, and then they ran cars on ethanol, and then legislation. Here's prohibition. No more making your own fuel. You have to buy fuel from us. So it's kind of
Yep.
a very shady history with vehicles, and just in general with the way things were run back in the day. They didn't help us out in the future, that's for sure. We're definitely trying to pick up the slack now.
Yeah, oh, for sure. For sure. And yeah, it makes me I'm all for renewables, and the reason for that is independence. If
Yes.
you generate your own electricity, which powers your own vehicle, you're your own person. Nobody can tell you, what to do. So it broke my
You read
heart a
my
little bit.
mind.
Yeah. So it broke my heart a little bit that Ontario, we're both Ontarians, decided to stop the funding of the wind farms. Um, you know, some of them were already built, and
Yeah.
then they wanted to tear them down. It's like, oh, come on. But yeah, so I'm big on green energy. I would love, I've had this dream for a while of building a small, like a smart car type
Oh yeah.
size car, but just more like an aerial atom, like just a metal exoskeleton, and basically be a golf cart
You,
powertrain, motors, two of
you're gonna
them.
see more of that on my channel this summer.
Yeah, I was getting to that. So, because
Mm.
yeah, basically what you have, you can buy all the parts to build your own golf cart, and you can actually get, uh, you know, 20 horsepower motors and stuff like that. So, can you talk to us a little bit about your golf cart? What's it look like now, and what's it going to look like in the summer then, if you're going to be working on it?
So I just bought a Yamaha G22. I believe it's a 2003 golf cart, and I just bought it. The listing said that the batteries were no good, and me being me, I was like, okay, well that works out to my benefit. So I had purchased it. Um, I have this thing on my channel where if I'm want to drive a certain direction on the channel, I start to reach out to people and ask. So I reached out to a couple of distributors of golf cart stuff like seat cushions and mirrors and all that. And one company in particular was very receptive, and they've sent me a lot of products. So I've just slowly been building the cart. What I want to do with it is put lithium batteries into it. I had joined up different branded batteries and put them into a 48-volt pack just to proof of concept and drive it around. This summer, I'm talking with a battery manufacturer. They have a new product line coming out, and they want me to introduce it on my channel, as well as others probably. But they've been talking to me, which has been fantastic. So I'm hoping to use their batteries, and I have it all wired up, and I have a plan in my head. I have an older previous video of using a 3000 watt low frequency inverter to run a log splitter. So what I want to do is be able to plug the log splitter inverter into the cart, run it off the battery, be able to split wood, and then use my electric DeWalt chainsaw to cut. And then that way I'm basically running an fully electric kind of landscaping sort of setup, but just running it in the backyard at my home and hopefully in the future in another home. Um, I put a stereo in it. So I went from 48 volt down to 12 volt with a converter, and I'm running a marine stereo. I have speakers in it. I've got headlights on it and everything like that. Long term, I was thinking about going a little bit crazy. I had, because the winter was coming up, so I'd reached out to a few companies about their electric snowblowers. Depending on what voltage they run, I could almost run that off the golf cart battery instead of the handheld batteries that you get. They're the drill kind of battery sort of ones. And then take two snow blowers, electric ones, and bolt them side by side and build a frame to go underneath the end to the carriage of the golf cart, and basically make my own electric golf cart snowblower.
That would be
Um,
awesome.
yeah, I always have weird ideas like that, and I would love to be able to actually do it. Um, but I need the more space, and I need a bit of a shop in order to be able to manufacture those type of things. So hopefully in the future, fingers crossed, I'll be able to expand that way. But yeah, so basically this summer it's going to be installing the batteries into the cart, and splitting some wood. Hopefully, we'll see how that goes.
It almost feels like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm getting the feeling that for not that much money, you could probably get, an inverter, like let's say a 3,000 watt inverter, and hook it
Mm-hmm.
onto the golf cart batteries, and even run two, 110-volt snow throwers like directly from the golf cart battery. So you could really, it may be someone who doesn't have fabrication skills, they could run even just one snow thrower, in front of their golf cart if they really wanted to, because at that point, if you're able to plug an appliance into a North American plug, the appliance has to be below, like, what is it, 1550 watts, 1550 watts, something like that. And so if you get like a 3,000 watt inverter, you'd be laughing, seems like, at
Yeah,
least.
yeah. Depending on what wire gauge you use for the AC side would depend on the watts. But yeah, you could. That's achievable. Um, Now you got me thinking about
There we
it.
go. Hey, I'm
uh,
always available for ideas. I have way more ideas than I have energy to sort of execute on.
yeah, me too. Me too, for sure. Yeah, that would be doable. I mean, even for lawn cutting, you put a
Oh
couple
yeah,
lawnmowers together. And I was
very
actually,
true.
I've had a video idea recently. I actually picked it up on another channel, and I was going to credit it to them, but I did see somebody else just put a 100 amp hour battery on top of a lawnmower with an inverter, and then turn it into a cordless one. So I wanted to make something like that this summer, but uh, we're still at pandemic prices for most things. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, they're a
How
little bit.
how haulable is 100 watts of lithium iron phosphate battery? So a 12-volt, 100 amp hours. Sorry, 100 amp hours is what I meant. But 12 volts,
Mhm.
100 amp hours. How heavy is that? Because they say, you can read the weight of them on Amazon, but because you don't have the bulk, you can't really tell how haulable that is. And here I have two 100 amp hours lead acid batteries, and they are not haulable at all. I think they weigh almost 70 pounds each.
So you're looking at 100 amp hour lead acid batteries. You would actually need two of those batteries to equal one 100 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery.
Correct, because even the
Um,
deep discharge, you're only supposed to discharge down about 50% on a deep cycle battery.
right. So if you're doing a weight comparison, you got to actually do two of them to one of the other guys. But yeah, I mean, you're talking anywhere between 25 to 30 pounds for a 100 amp hour battery, 12 volt. So very, very light stuff.
So you
It
can
opens,
easily haul two of those, one in each hand from your car to your workshop, for example.
oh, easy, 100%.
Yeah,
Most, you're talking like 60 pounds.
yeah, not a chance with the with the lead acid batteries. They weigh a ton. Like, I'm trying to explain, because like you and I probably know, right? We're both blue collar workers, but trying to explain
Hmm.
to someone sitting at home what, like, a massive plastic cube with no handles, 65 pounds worth, that weighs way more than you think. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Especially if you're trying to travel with them at all. Like, I mean, if you're just picking them up and throwing them in your trunk, it's not a huge deal. But once you want to become more mobile, it becomes more of an issue.
Yeah, I can't complain because I found them next to a dumpster, and they're perfectly fine. And they're actually like UPS backup batteries.
Oh
So
yeah, okay.
they're actually rated for harsh weather and high vibration environments. So someone threw out, I think they're about, 550 or $600 batteries a pop.
That's a great
And
find.
yeah, I was like, whatever, I'll bring it home, and if they test poorly, then I'll just go get the core fee from them. No big deal.
Hmm.
But one of them tested about 90 amp hours, and I think the other one is like 75, 76 amp hours. So not perfect, but for free 99, you can't complain.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the biggest thing about batteries too that I run into is car batteries. For some reason, some people think that all batteries are created equal, but if you're ever doing any kind of solar or off grid, never turn to a car battery. That's not what they're designed to do. Definitely look to get a deep cycle like a marine or an RV battery if you're going lead acid.
As someone who makes money replacing car batteries, I say go ahead, use car batteries. I'll just make more money off you.
Do not
uh,
use car batteries.
yeah. Listen, I ask all of my guests a question. Do you mind if I throw that question to you?
Sure, sure. I just maybe I can touch on it after your question. Just a couple basic things I wanted to let your listeners know about if they're planning on getting into kind of electrical and
Well,
stuff like
hell,
that.
let's just throw it now. Might as well.
Okay. I think the biggest thing that the novelist would have to learn if they're deciding on going and building their own is to get well versed in watts, amps, and volts. That was one of my biggest stepping stones, and 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 amp hours and watt hours. Get versed in that before you start to do anything, because my biggest holdback for me when I was starting out was I would always be looking at like amp hours of things. So I would look at a 12-volt battery, 100 amp hours, and then I would look at a 24-volt, 100 amp hours. Um, and I would think that it was the same amount of energy, but you've actually got to convert everything into watts and watt hours. And then that way you can actually judge like how much usable electricity you actually have.
Yeah,
So I'll always get some comments in there like, well, why would I spend all that money for a 48 100 amp hour battery when I can get a 12-volt 100 amp hour battery for a quarter of the price? And it's like, well, but you got to think about watt hours.
yeah, it's
So
four
you get
times.
so you get a lot more usable capacity. And another quick thing is the characteristics of lithium batteries, specifically lithium iron phosphate, because that seems to be the way everybody's going, is storage of them. So with a lead acid battery, deep cycle or car, you always want to store them at a high voltage. So you always want to have like a battery maintainer on them to keep the voltage high, to keep them healthy. But with lithium iron phosphate, it's a little different. You actually want to store them around 50%, and they don't like to be held and peaked at a high voltage. So if you're thinking about doing a setup to like, let's say, run a light in your shed when you're out there, and you've got a charge controller on it, and it's continuously holding a high charge, it's going to damage over time and degrade it. So if you're not charging and then, a couple of days later discharging, I would recommend don't charge up to full, just charge up a little bit of the way. And then if you're storing it, like if you're going to buy it and you had plans to build something and you don't get around to it, I would try and get the battery to 50% before you think about putting it away, just to save you some money in the long run.
I believe if I read the data sheet properly, I was reading a data sheet for lithium iron phosphate cells, and it was roughly 4,000 cycles of life, of usable life. But if you only discharged to 20% remaining and only charged to like 70% charged, it went up to like 10,000 cycles or something ridiculous. And
Yeah,
so that's why it right at the middle point, like you're talking about, that's where the battery wears the least. That's why you want it to leave it in the middle point as much as possible.
yeah. It comes a little bit difficult with lithium just because of the charging curve and discharging curve.
But yeah,
Um,
it's pretty flat.
yeah, so just by trying to calculate it off of voltage alone, like good luck. You definitely need some sort of measuring device like a smart shunt where you can actually see the amps going in and going out, and then you can appropriately judge what your power consumption is and what your battery's at. Also, another thing that comes into play with the high charge cycles being able to be achieved with lithium is the charge and discharge rate. So a lot of them you'll see like a zero point 0.2 C discharge rate, which is basically 20% of what the rated capacity is. So if you have 100 amp hour and you're charging and discharging at like 20 amps, which is zero point 0.2 C, uh, then your longevity of your battery just it'll last you forever. Like some of the batteries I have now, I foresee them lasting the rest of my life. Just by the way I'm going to treat them, handle them, and maintain them.
And I do have to remind my students this all the time because when we're talking about vehicles, energy density is super important. But when we're talking about like land-based systems where you could just stack batteries as high as you want, even when lithium cells start getting old and their capacity is diminished, because they don't have to move anywhere, the energy density isn't as important. Obviously, it is important, but you could keep using batteries well past their shelf life, their
Mm-hmm.
4,000 cycles. They'll just charge to a much lower, capacity and so
Right.
on. So, just want to let people know that it doesn't mean we have to throw out batteries after 4,000 cycles. In fact, that's one of the big things with hybrid and electric cars right now. Once those batteries are no longer dense enough to be in a car, they go into solar and wind farms, and they don't care about energy density there because they could just stack them up underneath the panels. And
Right.
who cares if they only have 10% of their capacity? You get them for almost free because you're recycling them, and therefore, you know, it still serves a purpose. So um, we tend to think that hybrid and electric cars have batteries that last 10 years, but that's not true anymore. It's more like 25 to 30 years if you count their end of life, working in solar farms and wind farms. So I'm loving
Yeah.
where the lithium battery situation is going personally.
Yeah, and if you look at to the specifications, a lot of time like they'll say 3,000 to 4,000, but then that'll be like to 80% depth of discharge, which means after those 3,000 or 4,000 cycles, you still have 80%. So your 100 amp hour battery now becomes an 80 amp hour battery, which is still great. So then you get another, 3,000 to 4,000 cycles out of it, and then you've got a 60 amp hour battery. So
Yep,
definitely very, very good technology.
exactly. Cool. I'm going to shoot you my question now. So the question goes: if you get a grant, so basically think basically unlimited money to start the business of your dreams. It doesn't have to be profitable because you're getting funded, but it does have to provide either a service or a product or both. What kind of business would you start?
Hmm. Very good question. So not profitable, but it's enough to sustain me comfortably.
You can be profitable if you want, but it doesn't have to be profitable because you would get funding no matter what.
Wow, that's an incredible question. It would definitely have to be in the area of helping other people because I definitely enjoy doing that. That is a very, very good question. Do some of your podcast partners, are they not able to answer that question? Because I think you might have your first one.
Some of them, they say they have a cop out answer, um, but the point of the question, and I'll just stall a little bit to give you time to think, but the
Yeah.
point of the question is to ascertain what your true um, wants and needs are in life, because we're all kind of stuck doing things that we may not be happy doing just because we need to make a living and feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, shelter ourselves. So it's kind of like if money wasn't an issue, where would we find Roland? You know what I mean?
You'd probably find me out in the wilderness. I don't know if I can answer that question. I've never thought about that before.
Hey, that's fair enough.
That's a
I mean,
very good question.
if you want to do a personal research search project of what it would be like to live off grid, and all you do is you sustain yourself and you keep getting paid for it, that's a perfectly fine answer too. No worries about that. it's a hypothetical. Nobody's going to
Yeah.
be holding you to it.
Yeah, no, I get it. Um, I don't know. I guess I mean I just be with my close friends and family and be self sustainable and just try and probably continue on with YouTube alone and then just run the day to day life, cooking and stuff like that. And outside of that, I mean, currently I've got a really good job, so there's nothing holding me back there. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. I'd probably just be playing around in the garage, building stuff and tinkering and working out and staying strong and just living life, I guess. Traveling the world.
I mean, that's a fair enough answer. It's an idealized version of yourself that most people probably don't get the chance to think about because we're busy people. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just it is what it is. Also, I'd be remiss. I can't let you go. I can't stop the podcast until you let me know what kind of dog you have because the viewers didn't hear it or see it because we edited it out. But it tried to break in the door earlier in the podcast. So, what kind of dog do you have?
I have a beautiful golden retriever, and her name is Luna. And she
Luna.
is amazing. Yeah.
There's a famous golden retriever on YouTube Shorts called Luna. Um, if anybody's ever interested, there, I think his name is uh,
Tucker.
Brady
I
Tucker.
think
Is
you're
it
thinking
Tucker?
of Tucker. Yeah, I think so.
Oh, anyways, there's a golden retriever mix. I think it's a golden doodle with super long hair,
Okay,
and
no, it's
his
not Tucker.
and his mom is a golden retriever called Luna. I think I've got those dogs right. Anyways,
Yeah,
I'm a big fanboy for dogs. So you after the podcast, pet Luna for me.
I will. And before we go, I would like to pose the same question back to you. What would you do if you didn't have to have your day to day job and you can
Well,
do whatever you want?
I would kind of be doing what I'm doing now. The issue with me is I have my dream job. They just won't allow me to do it enough. So I work at a college here in Ottawa, teaching the automotive trade to the next generation of apprentices. We have an apprentice program in Canada, and the problem is that I'm only contract employee, so there's no stability. Some years I worked more, you know, I probably worked all year aside from about, so I probably missed 2 months out of the whole year and I worked all the rest of it. And some years I only worked about 15 to 18 weeks in the whole year. And so I have to supplement my income with working as a mechanic. So I used to work at a Honda dealership. Now I work for a fleet company, very small company. It's just I'm the only employee, me and the guy who owns the business. Um, and so I would love to be a teacher, but with the stability of like full time employment.
Right.
And I would also love to be able to expand out my workshop here so I can tackle bigger projects. Like I would love to weld together a car. I would love to, build that solar raft I was talking about. But the simple fact is I've got nowhere to build it. And even if I were to build it, like I could just build it in my driveway, but then I have nowhere to put it. And so my ideal would be to have like a hacksmith size sort of like warehouse
Mm-hmm.
workshop, and it would be my YouTube production. And ideally, I would be able to teach still. And when I'm not using the warehouse for YouTube production and building cool stuff, it would basically be a maker space. So
So pretty
people can
much the
come in,
same thing I want is a bigger garage.
basically
Yeah.
basically that. And if anybody's listening from the Midwest US or somewhere where housing is not very expensive, Ontario, where Roland, sorry,
Yes.
Ronald,
No, it's okay. I get it a lot.
Roland and I live, and Vancouver. sort of British Columbia, where Linus from Linus Tech Tips is set up, is some of the most expensive real estate on the planet. Um, there's people who lived in San Francisco, which is known for really expensive real estate. They go up to Vancouver to visit, and they're like, "Wow, this costs just as much as home." So big properties are a pipe dream for us, unless you want to go live somewhere where your only internet is smoke signals. So
Mm,
yeah, a big shop,
yeah.
that would be my ideal for sure.
Yep.
And I like teaching. So having it be a makerspace where people can come in, learn how to drill and tap holes, learn how to weld, learn how to sew, 3D print, all that kind of stuff. That's my fantasy too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
those two
great.
things.
I'm not sure what the demographics like on your channel, but definitely my message to younger people, if any are listening, is have a good look at the trades and look at mechanics, look at carpenters, electricians, welders, all of it. It's a great business to get into. It's very fulfilling.
Probably not mechanics these days. At least in
No.
Ontario, it's the lowest paying trade. So you need like 20 grand worth of tools, and the wages are going up, but it's been for the last 15 years. Being a plumber pays something like 25% more, and you only need to know two things to be a plumber: is shit goes downhill and payday's Thursday. Sorry, plumbers, it was a joke. It's a joke. It's just a joke. But I think you're
And if
picking up
you're
what I'm
if you're
putting down.
if you're into industrial and you don't want to do anything, just call the carpenters to build you a scaffold. That's another thing.
There we go. So, Roland, where can people find you? Where do you want them to go to see your stuff?
I'm basically just on YouTube at Roll2Videos. Don't really do. I started an Instagram, but not really posting there much. And I don't do TikTok. And yeah, so basically just YouTube at
Okay.
Roll2Videos.
And if someone really likes the stuff that you're doing, is there a way for them to support you? Do you have like a Patreon, something like that?
I don't. I've thought about it. Um, I don't know if I want to do that. It's I've thought about it, but I think the way that the channel is going now, I don't think it's really needed. I think I can get by with just self funding and I guess donations from companies.
Fair enough. And so, yeah, I really want to thank you for taking this last minute podcast request and saving my bacon from talking about myself for another hour, another week in a row. I had COVID not too long ago, so I had
Mm.
no brain power. So basically, it was all like solo podcasts. I've been so busy, so I'm really glad to have someone to talk to, and I'm really glad I found another channel to binge watch. And I do recommend that the viewers at least go check out your stuff and leave a nice comment on one of the videos saying you came from the podcast. It's always good to see.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
No problem. And yeah, please do go check out Roll2Videos. There's a couple ones I will suggest, and I'll put them in the description below. And so I want to thank everyone for listening, and I'll catch you all on the next one.